You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today, we're looking at players that can be droppable in fantasy basketball leagues. These are not players that you just automatically go and drop. They're players that you should be looking at as guys who are moving into a drop zone that in the next few days or weeks might be players that you consider as guys that are droppable. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. And I think this point is illustrated by the number one guy on this list. And again, these lists that I do, them waiver wire ads or drops or buy lows, they're not in order of priority. They're just in order of the way that I chose to put the guys up on the list. So I don't think that this is the guy you drop and you drop the next guy after that. The first guy on this list is the burner, Jalen Brunson. And why is he a drop? Well, he has been excellent. Of course, he's been excellent while Luka Doncic has been out. But Luka Doncic could be back next game. So when that happens, Brunson's minutes go back to 18 a game, 20 a game. And if you're looking to make a stream for a guy that plays on Christmas Day, maybe you do move on from Brunson. So even if Doncic does miss the next game the Mavericks play, you might miss out on one pretty strong game from Brunson. But in the scheme of things, if there's a hot free agent out there, or if you're looking to get that advantage to open up a stream spot, to add someone for Thursday, to add someone for Friday, to add someone for Sunday, then that benefit outweighs having that one more good game. And I don't think there's going to be any more than one game here for Brunson where he's starting in place of Doncic. Now, a situation could arise where they decide that Brunson's a 30-minute guy and they take the minutes away from Delon Wright, Seth Curry, or Tim Hardaway. I just don't think that's going to happen. That's why, to me, if we want to be preemptive and you want to make moves and something's appearing to you that looks like it makes sense, then Brunson does become that guy who is droppable. Of course, the future MVP, Kyle Kuzma, appears on this list. He's still rostered in far too many leagues. In fact, in cash leagues, with our advanced roster percentage metric we've got on Basketball Monster, still 70% rostered, and that went up 2.1% over the last day, which is a crazy, ridiculous amount to me, considering just how bad he has been this season, the 256th ranked player. He did have some decent scoring last game with LeBron out. It was horrible efficiency. He doesn't do too much more than that. His minutes are down. I just don't see the point in 12-team leagues. So this is just another PSA that Kyle Kuzma should not be on a 12-team league roster. The next guy we talk about is Ben Mclemore, who's been putting up some pretty decent numbers this season, but that has dropped off of late. Daniel House is starting to get those minutes back again. Eric Gordon's return is coming in the next game, 2 games, 3 games. That's going to be there pretty soon. So Mclemore's value is going to drop. And despite the fact that he's playing almost 30 minutes a night over the last 2 weeks, he's the 170th ranked player. He's still hitting 3 threes a game. That is valuable. And he's still shooting 48% from the field. Really good. He's doing nothing else. So if the volume isn't there, if the minutes aren't there, and both of those things are going to come down, there's just no need to have Mclemore in at 12. And honestly, if we're being serious, I don't think that he's going to be a must-roster 14-team league guy moving forward. He's had that value. He's had good stretches. But now, as House is back and Gordon's coming, much like the Brunson situation, he can be moved on from. Tyler Hero, another player who I think is over-rostered, rostered in 79% of those competitive leagues. That is too many for me. This is a guy that, despite having no Goran Dragic, despite having no Justice Winslow over the last 2 weeks, fine, Dragic played one of those games. He's the 230th ranked player in that time. 29 minutes a game. He gives 1.5 threes. The shooting percentage is way down. Now, that will improve, 32%. He's better than that. But there's just not enough minutes there for him. So he's rostered in 60% of traditional Yahoo metric leagues, 79 of the competitive ones. It's way too many. He's more of a 14, maybe even 16-team league, probably more 14-team league guy. But under no circumstance should he be considered a must-roster guy. Of course, punt builds, situations, how your wire looks, you could all have him for one more game and see how it all goes. But with Dragic back, I think the end of Hero is pretty close. Cody Zeller, who was putting up some really big numbers, struggling a little bit at the moment. Moved back to the bench behind Bismack Biyombo. I think it's only going to get worse when PJ Washington returns. And Zeller over the last 2 weeks, despite these games where we thought he's been really good, and he has been good, he's still only the 144th ranked player. 25 minutes a night, 13 and 8, 56 and 71 as his percentages. They're okay. But are they great? No. He, over the course of the season, is the 157th ranked player. I'm not sure he maintains that number for the rest of the year. And again, we're talking about a really, really low upside player here who's had minutes taken from him by PJ Washington, by Bismack Biyombo now. And even if, say, he reestablishes himself as a starting center and plays 26 a night, what is the upside? We are still a little bit in upside acquisition mode in fantasy basketball. We're getting a little bit more to consolidation, but it's still more about, like, what's the point of Zeller when I can go out and I can find a guy like a Jakob Poeltl, I can go and grab an Ivica Zubac, I can go and grab short-term guys like Alex Len or Damian Jones in Atlanta. Those situations do arise quite often, and I think Zeller is not someone we need to be holding on to. The next guy on this list is Josh the Hitman Hart of the New Orleans Pelicans. He always has these little stretches where he plays well. And in fact, over the last 2 weeks, he is the 101st ranked player. 31 minutes a night, almost 6 boards, hitting 2.5 threes. That's where that value really is coming in, is in that 3-point volume and being a solid enough rebounder as a guard especially. But I think at some point Lonzo's minutes are going to come back up. Zion eventually is going to return. And we've seen over the last 2 games or so that Hart's minutes have peeled back a little bit. He is not a high upside type of a player. He's 114th over the course of the season. Now, compared to these other guys ahead of him on the list, he probably is a hold ahead of some of those guys like Mclemore and Hero and Zeller and Kuzma and Brunson. I probably would hold Hart ahead of those guys. But again, upside seems really low unless a Redick trade happens or a Ball trade happens. I think Ball would take Redick's minutes before Hart does. And he's just sort of sitting in this great as a 14-team league guy, subpar as a 12-team league guy, and in nearly all situations, outside of weekly changes leagues, you're going to have better use of using his roster spot for streaming rather than just sitting and holding on to Josh Hart. Now, I like Josh Hart as a player. I think he can be a fantasy valuable guy, but in this situation, it doesn't look great for me for the rest of the season. The pencil, Harrison Barnes. Barnesy. You know that I'm not big on Harrison Barnes as a player at his contract. You know I'm not big on him as a fantasy asset. But to be fair, he's been pretty good this season, especially when Marvin Bagley and De'Aaron Fox were out. The problem is those guys aren't out anymore. So Barnes is in real trouble. And despite the fact that those guys have missed so much time, he's not even a top 125 player this season, 128th overall. Over the last 2 weeks, he's 191st. Because what does he do? He scores. And with those 2 guys back, his usage is going to drop. In those last 7 games, some with Fox and Bagley, some without, 14.5 points, under 5 boards, 2.5 assists, 0.3 steals and 0.1 blocks, 38% from the field. Now, the 38% from the field likely increases, but the troubling number there is 20% usage despite the high minutes. And I think that's what Barnes is going to settle into. And I think from here on out, he won't be a top 150 player, meaning in a 10-team league, see you later. In a 12-teamer, I reckon you can move on as well. There's just really low upside with Barnesy. He's never been a guy that racks up rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, or shoots such good percentages that you have to have him, or such high 3-point volume. So I reckon he is cooked. Of course, I'm recording this before the Baptist John Collins returns, so Jabari Parker is done. There's just no need to have Jabari anymore. And we've seen even over the last 2 games before John Collins returned that Parker moved to the bench. One of those games he had an absolute monster. He had like 25 points in 24 minutes. The next game he played 17 minutes. It does seem like we are phasing out of Jabari, and he was great for the early part of the Collins suspension. Probably a little bit overrated towards the end of it, but still, over the last 2 weeks, he's the 88th ranked player, and that's absolutely nothing to sneeze at in 23 minutes as well. On some really high efficiency, he's rebounding okay, he's getting steals, but there's just not going to be that 28 to 29 minute upside with Collins around. I think we see that already. He's not even at that level now before Collins returns. So again, if you do want to move on from Collins, and this has probably been the case for the last week or two anyway, if you want to move on from, not from Collins, if you want to move on from Parker, obviously this is the time to do it. Your sell high window has slammed shut pretty convincingly, and the only real mode you have to do that with is dropping. The last guy I want to talk about is Dario Saric. Now, he gets a marginal reprieve with the DeAndre Ayton ankle injury, which is obviously not ideal. But Saric, in that one game that Ayton returned, his minutes were well done. In fact, even the next game when Ayton was out, he played only 19 minutes. And that's because it's a trickle-down effect. With Ayton starting, Aaron Baines goes as the backup center. That means Frank Kaminsky, who for some reason the Suns like, he has to push over to power forward. They also play Cam Johnson at power forward. So those 32, 33 minutes that Saric was getting, including some minutes at center, he's going to lose all of those center minutes and he's going to lose some of those power forward minutes. So while he is the 91st ranked player over the last 2 weeks in 29 minutes a game, the last 2 games have been low. He's averaging 14 and 8, and he is just almost a top 90 player during that time. He offers no steals or blocks, low assist numbers in Phoenix, and he's just not going to have those same opportunities. Center Saric is much better from a fantasy point of view than power forward Saric. Now we're going to get more power forward Saric, plus fewer minutes as well. That is all a recipe to me to not be a top 150 guy for the rest of the season. And I think, again, not a must drop, not a guy, well, man, I've got Saric, got to get rid of him because I've got to add Dorian Finney-Smith or someone like that. Like, that's not the sort of move that you make. I've got to go and drop him so I can add Bobby Portis. Like, that's not what I mean. It's more like if someone out there who's on the wire, hey, is Markelle Fultz on your wire? Then make that straight swap. It's pretty clear. If there's other guys out there who can have that value, who are potentially under-rostered, then Saric, like these other guys ahead of him, like Josh Hart, like Cody Zeller, they are candidates to be dropped in those type scenarios. So that will do it for my players who can be dropped, not should be dropped, who can be dropped in fantasy basketball leagues. I'll be back today to recap all of Monday's games. That'll be coming later tonight, so check your feeds, check the channel over on YouTube as well. Subscribe, and you'll never miss a show. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Go and smash me a thumbs up. Go and give it a 5-star rating and review. Tell your friends, tell your missus, tell everybody, tell your misters. In fact, tell everybody to go out there and give it a review. Tell your friends to listen, download, all that good stuff. It is your Christmas gift to me. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.